Magdalene's blog 31. So what did you really want to ask me? Philo had asked. Ariane tried to frame that one question from her heart, but couldn't find the words that fitted the feeling buried within her. So she said nothing for long seconds while she struggled with herself. Philo had smiled again. You will find your answer even though it may not come in words, because I know you're being true to yourself. That is all that counts in the end. Hold out for the key that opens everything for you. That's what remains with me strongest, Mary. Even though so many greater things happened, especially at the Temple of Isis, it is this that somehow stayed with me, that I shall find the answers that I really want and need, if I can clear that space within myself, in my life, to receive them. I was excited about the news that Ariane brought, and it was the first time that I could truly say that I no longer felt regrets about Marcellus, or wished that things had worked out differently. There was always the ongoing labours of our life in the temple to temper my enthusiasm, though. Things had got easier for me, certainly, but we still had to take our turn in the kitchens and with the washing, and in the gardens and the cosmetic and clothing industries, and in the shrines too. And of course there were still our visits into the city. From amongst my friends, Helena, or to me Helen, was the one that had got involved with trading in the city. More specifically, she worked within the cloth and clothing trade that the temple had a big share in. Her Zoroastrian friend, Leomonides, was also in the trade, bringing in silks and spices from the furthest east. Such connections were invaluable to the temple, and won Helen greater freedom than others might enjoy. Aella, on the other hand, had gained a preeminence in the shrines, and she jealously guarded her status as the favourite amongst Aphrodite's maidens. Cara, as I called Carmel, was involved in everything as ever, always knowing what was going on. She was being groomed, I think, to be a temple administrator. We all still got together when we could, after the morning rite or at an evening meal, but it was with Helen that I spent a few weeks working as springtime arrived anew, for my workload in the library had lessened with Ariane's return. We went out quite frequently, and especially as Sarita was with child again, and always welcomed our visits. I was over the novelty of being out in the great city, and was rather shocked at what it was starting to reveal, now that I wasn't totally involved in looking for my Adonis in every young man we saw. The poverty and misery of many of Antioch's citizens was plain to see, together with so much disease that everyone tried to push out of view, as though that cured it. Leprosy was one of the worst burdens we faced, and also the number of people possessed by evil spirits. They were all declared unclean and were avoided. One day, Helen and I were going through the suburbs with a senior priestess called Selene, looking for the house of a new dress designer that Leomonides wanted us to use. The partnership with Helen's businessman was flourishing. We used routes that we knew to be safe and relatively pleasant, but we hadn't been this way for a little while, and a new building program was underway, forcing us to detour around it. These streets were much less familiar and well appointed. Rubbish abounded, and the smell from the open ditches was awful. In fact, we just decided that we were going to turn back, when this wild, unkempt-looking young woman started calling out and hobbling towards us. I could see that she was unclean, and it soon became clear that she was possessed, with many self-inflicted cuts and bruises on her upper arms and shoulders. As we turned and backed away, she shouted obscenities at us, and even called out our names. This wasn't altogether unusual, as the evil spirits could know things others wouldn't, but something made me turn back towards her. Did she know me? Did I know her? I couldn't decide, but hands were pulling me away, and the woman, whoever she was, had picked up a fair-sized stone and thrown it at us, though it landed well wide. We escaped and found a better route to get to where we were going, but I was haunted by what had happened. The woman's voice had at one moment been full of taunting hatred, but in the next it called with heart-rending pleading, and this had cut me to the quick. I even thought I should have recognized her, and this impression wouldn't leave me. Then, with a kind of horror, I remembered who she was. A girl named Rosilda, who was a friend to one of the young men who had been in the wrestling tournament at last spring festival. Realizing this made it all become so much more personal. I would look out for her whenever we went out and about the city, and couldn't help noticing all the other outcasts on the edge of society. There didn't seem to be anything that could be done, though, except strive to keep ourselves out of the mess. A mess where crime thrived, and only the strong arm of the Roman army prevailed to keep the rest of us secure. Why should it be this way? I asked Belle one day, and she replied that it was because proper worship of the gods was not observed, and therefore the people had to endure the results that were visited on them. Meanwhile, I thought to myself cynically, our duty to the gods seems to be to align ourselves with those who hold the power, and to gauge where that power and wealth was going next. It wasn't that I was disillusioned with the temple life, but I was able to observe how Belle had developed a multifaceted empire within the greater Roman world. An empire that also involved many of the wealthy women of the city, and I couldn't help admiring her for her skillful use of her powers to achieve this. But more and more I also wondered how such a large portion of the population could just be discarded, and because of Rosilda, this troubled me like a personal wound. I couldn't help but remember again what Granny Beth had said about finding the need for kindness, and this need seemed to be growing ever closer and stronger. It was later that summer when I had my next real chance to put this question again to Belle. She and Ariane were up on Adonis Tower with Philippa and myself. It was well past midnight on a clear warm night, with the stars spread in amazing glory across the whole sky. The late waning moon had not yet risen, but we had been there to observe the great constellation of the Hunter rise into the sky, followed by the special star of Our Lady. That is the sign of our Adonis, and Osiris too, said Belle, being raised up by the light of the heavenly Virgin and Priestess. It was so calm, so inspiring, I felt I could almost fly up into the heavens and join in the celestial singing of glories to the Most High there. It is truly beautiful, I said. However many nights we spend up here, recording the movements, it never ceases to impress anew. Yet, I hesitated, not wanting to break the spell it had cast on me. Yet how is it that our world is allowed to teem with disease and evil? This glory above is such a contrast to what we saw today down by the river. I found it hard not to try to do something to help the poor stricken creatures we came across there. There is nothing that you could have done, you know that, said Belle, looking back to the horizon where the yellow crescent of the old moon had just lifted itself into the night sky. She gazed at it for a few moments, and then seemed to make a decision. But I tell you what we shall do. Tomorrow we shall consult the goddess herself, and you can ask the questions, Magdalene. Ariane, you and Magdalene should meet me in the back of Temple Court at midnight tomorrow, and come prepared to record our meeting. You, Magdalene, come clothed in your best white robes, and bring your silver priestess knife.